Okay, may I have a call for a motion to exit executive session for the purpose of discussing matters leading to the discipline of a particular student, current litigation, and the employment of particular persons. Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, I'll call for a motion to enter open session. Second. Motion carries. All right, let's please stand for the pledge to the flag. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh. Okay, this. Nothing there. Okay. Okay, our next we'll go to privilege of the floor. This portion of the agenda provides an opportunity for residents of the Niagara Wheatfield School District to be heard. Any person who wishes to address the board is invited to do so at this time. Please state your name, address. Complaints or criticism about individual school personnel are not appropriate in this forum and will not be allowed. The board may not respond to questions. They should be referred to the superintendent of schools at any time. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. The first, we do have one, Amber Vanessa. Hi.
I've never done this before, so I don't know if you can answer it. So who's, as a board, you're all, in charge of making the rules for discipline? How does it happen? Who makes the code that comes?
Here's what I'll do, just if you heard, what I'll do is I'm gonna write down all of your questions, okay? And then we'll be able to respond either tonight or afterwards. So why don't you ask your questions on the record and then we'll respond that way, okay?
Okay, where is it written that when a student is disciplined, that they are suspended for 2 months or 2 weeks or a week? Who makes that decision? And when did it go into place that what happens outside of school, the child is disciplined inside school? Another question is, who monitors the children that drive to school with no license? That's all.
Give me 1 second, I'm sorry, the last one, hold on, it was about,
How are you monitoring the children that drive to school without a license?
got it. Thank you. I don't know, is that, you need the other one that's right here, right here, Bob.
Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay. Next, we have consensus agenda items. I will now call for a motion to approve the following consensus agenda items 1 through 5 as submitted.
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Personnel items. I will now call for a motion to approve the personnel report 1 through 12. You did, okay, may I have a motion? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Standing committees. Capital projects, Dan, you want to?
Yeah, just 2 things regarding the capital project. We do have a concern, related to, the timelines for some of the, equipment that's coming in, so that, particularly if it's coming from outside the United States, obviously, everybody's, aware of the trade wars that are going on. That's an impacting timeline, certainly impacting cost to a degree. So that's something we are concerned about. Remember, Our build time, especially in areas where we want students to be in September, our build time is very, very short, right? We're talking the very end of June through August. So we do have some concerns about that. Some good news on the capital project front is that the approvals from New York State, from GISA, have really quickened. So where they were 18 to 20 weeks, they're now much, much shorter. And one of the reasons for that is they've allowed for third-party reviewers again. When they were doing that before, the review times were a lot less. Review times are really important for school districts because of that short timeline that we have for a lot of the building that we do. And if you figure something gets pushed back almost a half a year, the costs of that escalation go up. So being able to get these things done in a much shorter period of time, much better for the district budget, and the monies that we have put aside for the capital project work. So that's what I have on the capital
Okay.
project.
Policy committee?
Yeah, so we had. Okay, so we had a meeting prior to this meeting this evening, discussed a few policies, and they will be on the agenda next time for the first reading.
Alrighty. Okay, next, what's
Just
it?
informational.
Just information. Do I read it? No. Okay, the ex officio student member report.
I also. Another thing, I can't remember exactly what day, Thursday or Friday last week. Some parents. Also about that.
Oh, good. Present, I have nothing at this time. Superintendent's report.
Great, thank you. Let me start with an event that happened at Eric Road. The parent group there and the staff arranged to make teacher night. And it was at the Meadow Drive McDonald's. The place was packed. It was awesome. The staff that were there did an incredible job. I've never been in a McDonald's when it's been that busy. There were people kind of waiting in a line to get in. The parents there to see their, the kids' teachers and the staff members, and it was really incredible. I know the group raised a considerable amount of money, but it was a really, really neat event. They called it McTeacher Night. There were these green shirts that all of the teachers who were involved were wearing, but it was a really neat experience for the Eric Road community. I also want to touch base on what you got a little glimpse of at our last board meeting when we had the table set up over there, the Invention Convention. Our students that had placed actually now did incredibly well at the state level, and they're moving on. So there's actually going to be an article that's going out should be in the Gazette on the winners both at CV and West Street. So congratulations to all those kids, families. Obviously, we saw the work that they did for those projects. It was pretty incredible. Congratulations to the teachers who were organizing those events in both those schools. We only saw a representative group from CV, but both CV and West Street did incredibly well. So we're really good. just mark your calendars for April 26th. I know I mentioned at the last meeting, the Eco Campus project is from 8 to 11 a.m. that day. Here it's a Saturday. Then from 11 to 1 o'clock, we have the Wellness Walk and the Wellness Fair. So it should be a really great day for the school community. Please think about coming. Did you have anything else on that, Mr. Stay?
No.
Okay,
No, it's kind of district.
it's on the district Facebook page. I think the last I saw, there were like 30 vendors or something like that. Does that sound about right? Somewhere around there.
Yep.
The Federal Education Department. You're probably reading a lot about the Federal Education Department and the possibility of the Federal Education Department going away. Obviously, one of the main concerns a school district would have is the funding streams that are connected to that department. For our district, the two main funding streams are IDEA funds and title funds. What they've said to this point is that those funds are going to be transferred to another department, and that department will now be overseeing those funds. We're gonna expect that that's what's gonna happen. That's what they've said it's going to happen. If not, we'll certainly have to adjust. But if you're hearing things, that's my take on it. Okay. And then last, I just want to recognize Dr. Allison Davis. She will be retiring, and she received, or is one of the recipients of the Western New York Education Service Council Award of Excellence. Those who are at the board table know, but Allison's been in the district for about 12 years. If you put somebody's life on a graph, their work life on a graph, and you said, what'd you do the last, 10, 11 years? And you look at the fact that about 10 years ago, we were the most fiscally stressed district in New York State at 88.3%. The higher the percent, the worse you are. We were the worst there was in New York State. Okay. Now we're to 0%. And there's the Board of Education obviously has a ton of work to do with that, and they're responsible for that. And our business office, and the business office has been led by Allison. So the award is very, very well deserved. And you're going to hear a little bit more about our long range plan tonight. But I just want to say congratulations, great job, and you've done great things for our district, and we appreciate it. And that's all I have.
Alrighty, reports to the board, finances. Rick Tibbs.
So I am happy to welcome back. I think every year that I've been here, Dr. Rick Timms has been here. He is going to be presenting on our long range plan. I don't know anyone in New York State who knows more about school finance and long range planning than Dr. Timms. And I know that he's meant a lot to what I just said about Allison. So thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for working with us as a consultant. We appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here. Well, I think you all have got a little handout, so if you follow along, we've got a great report for you. And I'd like to echo what your superintendent said about working with Allison. She's been terrific to work with, and I think she's just fantastic. Well, here we go. It'll be on the screen. How's that? I'll use a little red button.
We will send you paper copies. There should have been paper copies.
All right. So here we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a whole bunch of things that we usually look at. So if you take a look at your screen up here, we'll always look back 5 years to find out how the district's been doing in the last 5 years. And we use what we call the ST3. It's the documents, the official document for the state education department. It talks all about your revenues, expenditures, all different funds that you have and so on. So we can track the progress of the district. And of course, your district's progress over the last 5 years has been phenomenal. State Education Department website calculations. Allison and the business office constantly submit additional data to the State Education Department about students, say numbers of students with special needs, general ed kids, CTE kids, attendance, your demographics, and so on. And these are always updated by the State Education Department. And of course, what I'm going to be showing you tonight is some of your state aid calculations, and they bear a large part of that. School district external auditor report and recommendations. It's always good to see what the external auditor says, and your reports have been excellent. Documents of capital expenses and debt. To the superintendent's point, you're in the middle of a capital project, so we're always watching capital projects. We're always watching your debt and your building aid and things like this, transportation aid. We're trying to track all that for you. And that goes along with all your debt instruments like bonds and bands, things like this. We also take a look at the district's use of capital reserves because it's one of the most important reserves the district can have. And we're going to talk about your reserves in a little more detail in a minute. Debt service schedules, we take a look at those to make sure because those are part of your tax cap calculation. We take a look at all your state aid, including foundation aid. I'm showing you a list of it tonight and where we think it's going. Expense-driven aid is pretty important to a district, but what happens is districts have to understand that the aid usually comes in after you've made the expense, so you always have to front the money. We take a look at any tax implications of things going on in the district. For instance, the tax cap, the debt service, pilots, things like this. The use of the debt service fund or any reserves, how you use those funds and reserves. I read, I'm probably the only person in the state reads every report by the controller on school districts. I read every single one of them. And that's because what I'm supposed to do is make sure you try and stay out of as much trouble as possible. Because we don't want to cross swords with the controller. But at the same time, we also want to make sure the district is in good financial condition going forward. The controller has a habit of looking current and past. So there's a nice mixture there. Use of funds, appropriated fund balances, which is a fancy name for the difference between what you're calculating as your for sure probably revenues and pretty close to your for sure expenses. And also the unappropriated fund balances, the money you have on hand for cash flow. We take a look at projected TRS rates, teachers retirement system and employee retirement system rates. Now we look at this because it's a big number in all school district budgets. So when these numbers move by any percentage, it tends to have a big financial impact. Now TRS, for instance, is not moving very much. That rate is not moving very much into the next year, but ERS is moving in double digits. But keep in mind, the people who are in the employee retirement system are usually non-certified staff. So it could be like cleaners, custodians, secretaries, the school nurse, perhaps, things like this. Whereby in the teachers retirement system, you have teachers, your guidance counselor, principals, things like this. And so what happens is the rates are different. The important thing is even if the rates did not change, your cost would probably accelerate. And the reason is because whatever the rate is, it's multiplied times salaries. So when salaries move, that number moves. So we've got to keep an eye on it. The next thing we talk about is the implication of the loss of the federal grants, the CRISA and ARPA grants. In other words, the Coronavirus Relief Act and also the American Rescue Plan. Because your district had access to all these federal monies and they did use it very, very wisely, helped you with fund balance and helped you with a lot of costs. So we think there's good kudos for the district there. Determination of future expense calculations, including salaries and benefits. You've got to remember that probably between 65 and 75% of your budget is tied up in salaries and benefits. So that's a real big number. It's your delivery system and your infrastructure. So we've got to keep an eye on that. And then, of course, I torture Allison every year with millions of questions, million forms. I need this document, that document, send me this, send me that. I lost that, send me that one again. You probably didn't send it to me, but I'm making this up. But anyway, so I gotta really say, she's really been a good soldier about the whole thing because I do drive her nuts, I know, but she's been very patient with me. But she's really good. She's really good. So here we go. Let's take a look at your reserves. So I'm just going to go through them piece by piece with you to make it easy. You've got a workers' compensation reserve and unemployment insurance reserve. Now, these two reserves are really for obvious reasons. So workers' compensation group that you've got to pay for your insurance for workers' compensation. It helps you pay that for those costs, and unemployment in case people leave district service and you have to pay unemployment. Now, the interesting thing about these two things is that workers' compensation by itself generally doesn't move that much. But should you have a large number of claims in a short period of time, it can move pretty significantly. So it's good to make sure that you have like a rainy day fund for it. And if you notice it's moved up and down, if you notice that number's moved up, down, you built into it, but you're also using it. And I think this is important. In other words, you're not just stockpiling it, you're using them for their purpose. And your unemployment insurance reserve moves around a little bit too. The interesting thing about these two reserves, though, is should the district have an emergency where it needed cash immediately, It only takes a board resolution to move money in and out of those reserves. So you don't have to go through voter approvals and things like this. So it's a nice rainy day fund. We always want to use a reserve for its intended purpose, but every now and then something comes out of the blue. You do have reserves for ERS and TRS, and they are properly funded. And even your audits point out that there's no issues with those as well. So those are also important. Now, if we do have spikes in these things from time to time, to be honest with you. Now, here's why the pensions are another important factor we got to look at. People are actually staying in their jobs longer. They're retiring when they're older. They're making more money than they have in history. Does that make sense to you? Well, when I started teaching, this is when the earth was cooling. What happened was I made $5,000 a year. So you can just imagine, right? I mean, what was I going to do with all the money? All right, maybe the earth wasn't cooling, but I know the dinosaurs were gone. Okay. But anyway, so people make more money now, they live longer. So therefore, there's more pressure on the pension system to pay more money, right? It costs more. So we got to keep an eye on there. Now, there's a reserve for property loss liability and insurance. You have no money in it, nor do you need any. Right now, you've got adequate insurance coverage for these types of things, and there doesn't seem to be any threats or liabilities on the horizon. You do have a tax certiorari reserve. So this is where perhaps the person who owns property says, I've been overassessed and I'm going to claim that I paid too much in taxes. And they join with a legal proceeding, we'll say a town, a village, or a school district, saying, I want some of my money back because I feel that I was overassessed and therefore I paid too much in taxes. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to get all their money back. It usually goes through a judicial process. But if they win any money back, usually what happens is the district is usually served with some paperwork that says you owe this person or this entity X amount of dollars, and you have, sometimes they say 30, 45, 60, or 90 days to pay it. And you got to write them a check. So you don't want that interfering with the flow of your budget. So what the district has done is when these tax certiorari claims come up, they've set aside money so it doesn't affect your budget should their claim be successful. If the claims are adjudicated, and if you notice the money changes every year you're supposed to reassess, shall we say, how much you should really have in that reserve, and therefore update the amount of money you have in it. So this is a good practice. So far, we've just got a pile of good practices here. Now, we also have reserve for employee benefits and accrued liability. Now, this is a very restricted reserve, and you can see it's been up and it's been down and it's been back up a little bit. Now, this reserve is usually, it's a general municipal law reserve, and it's used for when people leave the district. You can pay them instead of out of the budget. You can take some of this money and pay them from unused sick, personal, and vacation days, overtime pay, things like this, that would not be a normal part of a budget. Now, some budgets do have money set aside for that, but sometimes they have a huge number of retirements at once, and therefore they need to tap the reserve. And that's a good idea. I think when you see reserves moving, you can tell the district is using them properly. Then we've got capital reserves, and if you'll notice, I've got a whole bunch of them in blue, and you'll see what's happening here is there's one in the middle that's a 25 capital improvement reserve, and it's in blue, but there's no number there, there's no amount in there. And that's because what has to happen here is the F means they've been fully funded. So capital reserves, especially for capital improvements, your district has been probably a regional leader in improvements for capital reserves, for capital improvements, transportation, and technology. And you can see it here because what happens here is this is one of the perfect reserves. You notice they all start in different years. So what has happened is the district has actually planned out its capital projects in advance. It has planned out its transportation costs in advance and its technology. And what happens is every one of those reserves have to be voted on and approved by the voters. So to me, it's perfect transparency with the voters. In other words, we're saying, look, we're displaying, here's what we want to do with our finances. Would you let us do it? Because we have a plan. We know that certain things are going to cost more over time. Let us save, accrue interest to these accounts, and therefore not have a tax impact when we need to spend the money. So this is a gift that keeps on giving, particularly because technology, you can use that technology reserve, buy technology through BOCES. You've saved the money, but you can get aid on the cost of the technology. Same thing with transportation, and the same thing with capital improvements. So technically speaking, you can offset a taxpayer impact and simultaneously get aid on your own money. So this is a spectacular plan. I wish all my clients had plans like this. I've got a couple that have them like this, but I wish they all did. This is a master class in how to do it. And you have to see the numbers going up and down as you put money in, replenish money, use money for different projects. And some of them are actually getting toward the end of their life. You can see the one from 2017, we got $127,000 in it. Now, if you start a new capital reserve, we'll say for a voter proposition in 2025, as an example, you can include in the resolution the transfer of that $127 plus accrued interest to help seed the new reserve. So you've got a lot available here at your disposal. Just an excellent plan. Reserve for repairs, you don't have anything in there, but you have constantly kept up with your capital improvements because you have a master plan. And this is wonderful. What you can't get done in this project, you will do in the next project. You're thinking about it all the time. And you really don't need much of a plan for repairs because the idea is you're way ahead of the game. The other problem with the reserve for repairs is that usually a repair is not aid eligible. In other words, there's no state support for repairs. For instance, if you had a roof leak, the state doesn't want you to repair the roof. I know it sounds weird. They want you to replace it because there's going to be more leaks. If you've got one, there ultimately will be more. They'd rather have you invest in the infrastructure and get it done. So in other words, the repair reserve for you, not really important. Reserve for debt. You're not eligible for a reserve for debt per se, because a reserve for debt is when you have, say, a building that was student occupied space and you decide to sell the building and consolidate the district inside. In other words, move kids out of one building and empty it. Then you could sell the building. If you owed money on the building, you have to take whatever you sold it for, put it in that account, and then help pay off the debt over time. And then other restricted fund balances, I've got some districts that have that, but you know what else they have? They have a nuclear power plant in their district, or they have a giant coal-fired plant, you know, for electric. And what's going to happen is they're going to close. So they're stockpiling tens of millions of dollars in that reserve, because as soon as they close, all the tax money from those plants goes away. It becomes an empty lot. The assessment changes to practically zero, and most of the land is contaminated. So what happens is the district has a chance to lose revenue. So what they do is they try and stockpile money in there and try and help fund their own district because they've saved ahead from those plans.
Rick, if I could just really quick, for those, you know, who haven't heard the discussions on our budget, where we've talked about the capital improvement reserve and the capital reserve for transportation. As far as the capital improvement reserve is concerned, we've seen 20 to 30% escalation in costs for the work that we're doing when you look at the number of those reserves. And I think many of you already know the cost of, you know, the move to electric buses. Those buses have gone up. The price of those buses would potentially be about 3 times what the car costs. So when you look at those numbers, just keep that in mind.
That's a good point, because what happens is what you're doing is you're hoping for the best, but planning for the worst. And I think that's exactly what you've got in this plan. So you see overall, over time, you've actually built the reserves and used them appropriately. Now, if you notice, the height of the reserves was probably in the June of 22 year when you're up to about 27.9. But don't forget, remember I mentioned in my first document, we take a look at federal funds. You guys have been able to use those federal funds to properly build fund balance and save for the rainy day. I wish a lot of districts did that. It was a very well thought out plan. So as we look forward here, I got things on automatic pilot here, but if you'll notice, I took that 2017 and 18 transportation and the capital reserves. And what I'm going to do is we want to buy some buses and stuff. We want to buy some things. So you'll see along the line there in technology, you'll see the number go down a little bit. Everybody see it, the 2021 technology reserve moving. So we do have plans to keep using these reserves. Now, to keep in mind on that purple line at the bottom, you're going to start depleting those reserves over time, but for their useful intended purpose to benefit not only the district's infrastructure, the district's need to deliver their system, and also to help taxpayers. So you're not taxing for the full cost of these items. So for instance, right now, Alice and I were toying around with the idea, we'll say about the buses going long term, and you see the cost goes up. And of course, technology based on your technology plan, and vehicle purchases based on your vehicle needs. And of course, vehicles are starting to become very expensive. For instance, I think it was like, I don't know, maybe 7, 8 years ago, I bought a pickup truck for a school district for $30,000. I bought 2 in the last 2 months for 75 and 85,000. Because they have to be able to plow snow and everything else, right? Put the solder on the back and all that, so things are getting expensive. And to the superintendent's point, we're trying to plan for that. You can see, but we're not using the same amount every year. It's moving because we can actually move our schedule around a bit. So there's some real thought involved here. So the district uses them effectively, efficiently, and properly, and it supports great financial planning. Most districts simply come up with a school district budget annually and don't think of anything after that. But you're way ahead of the game, and I think that's why your financial score has gone right through the roof from a high to a low, which is really good. Let's take a look at your state aid. Let's focus in on foundation aid first. Let's start off at the first 2 years, 22, 23, 23, 24. You had an increase of 1.9 million, an 8.4% increase, as you can see on the bottom, but the foundation 8% down there, so it didn't mix up with the numbers. Now that was great. Here's the only problem with that. You had waited 17 years to get that money. You had waited 17 years to get that money. Guess what? That's not all the money they owed you. You know what they did? What they did is they didn't pay you for 16 years. And then in the 17th year, they say, what would we owe you for just this year if we paid you up? And that's where you got the money. So all the previous years, you never got any of the money, but you've done well besides that. Now, if we go to the 24-25 year, you'll see the increase is about $169,000. You see that? Now, the interesting thing there is that it was hardly any increase at all. The legislature really didn't want to pass a huge foundation aid increase. But you know what? It was what I would call an old formula. I think many of you know I've been lobbying for probably since 2006 to change the foundation aid formula. And I think we got some traction, because if you'll notice in the year 25-26, you're getting 2.243 million. See that? That is what we're calling the governor's run. All right, that's the governor's run. Now there are other runs. There's a November run, there's a February one. There's going to be another one in April when the budget's passed. There'll be another one in May. There'll be another one in June. There'll be another one next October. So it's a moving number. But the truth of it is, what the governor did is she asked the Rockefeller Institute, if you remember, how to change the formula. So I testified, and I had a number of meetings privately with that committee, and I actually submitted like 20 pages of formula changes that they could make. Well, she picked up 3 of them, which is great. And what they did is they were all designed and they helped your district, because they changed the census for community poverty, and they are for the community, and then they also changed how to measure poverty for students instead of just FRIPL, free and reduced price lunch. And because many school districts went to the breakfast lunch programs, people weren't handing in FRIPL, people looked wealthier. So what she did is she embraced what we called economically disadvantaged. It's in my report. She picked it up, so now she's looking at SNAP, Medicaid, HEAP programs, and a whole myriad of others, which made you look poorer, which made you get more aid. So I'm really happy for you. I really think that's great. Now, the big thing is once you hit a plateau, though, they change the formula. Does it mean that you're going to have that level of growth every year? And the answer would probably be, well, probably not. Now, you also have a growing special needs population, and I'm hopeful that the legislature picks up more parts of the formula and changes it, and that would also help you in the future. But I only put in a 2.5% increase because I don't think as a financial analyst, I'm supposed to come here and create an artificially rosy picture. I want one that's probably a little more realistic and more on the downside than the upside, if that makes any sense. So we don't get a little too overexcited here. So I think you're in good shape for that. But you do notice that 2.2 million turns into 681,000 pretty fast, right? So it's kind of like, again, long-range planning will help you. It's kind of like when you get that bonus, the last thing you want to do is spend it all at once. Think about it, and I think you're doing it. The next set of aid categories is summer school transportation aid, which is very scant for most districts. It's just usually a couple bucks. Transportation without summer school, building aid, BOCES, and then the two high-cost aids known as public excess cost, high-cost aid, and private excess cost aid. Now let's go through them. Transportation. Now, if you notice, your transportation aid has gone up a little bit and down a little bit, but mostly up. Now, what's going to happen here is we can't really tell where it's going to start going as we get into the 27 year in particular. And the reason is, and your superintendent pointed it out, if you have to buy zero emission buses, all of a sudden the calculus changes. Not only are the buses 3 times the cost of a regular bus, but they will be amortized 8 years, not 5 years. So even though they cost more, it'll take longer for the aid to arrive. Does that make sense? So I've kind of said, well, let's just keep it until we really know what's going on and stabilize that. Now your building aid, you'll notice it's gone up a little bit and down a little bit. Whenever you see a red in the building aid, what that means is old debt is falling off. When you see black, that means more building aids coming out because of capital projects. And you can see the big pump you're going to have 26, 27. And then you've got in 27, 28, you've got some red there. And what's happening there is old capital projects are falling off. In other words, your debt is going away. Now you have a couple choices there. You could do another capital project to keep that from falling off, or you could simply let it fall off and in any of those years, try and recoup it with a new capital project. It depends upon your cash flow. So far, so good. BOCES aid depends upon what you buy in BOCES services. Now, one of the things that people always get confused is, well, we send a lot of special needs kids to BOCES, so we get a lot of BOCES aid. Well, that's not true at all. The special needs kids that go to BOCES, the aid for them would be either in foundation aid or in public excess cost aid, because they're a special category. CTE kids, career and technical education kids, are the ones in the BOCES aid. But it's also other BOCES services that you get. For instance, you might get some services and staff development. You're buying technology perhaps through there. Now, if you know, some years it goes up and some years down because you have a schedule to buy some of these things or the student population changes. So you don't have to buy the same amount of tech every year. But keep in mind that when you buy something through BOCES, you pay the money 1 year and the aid comes in the year afterwards. So the key thing is always remember the district and all these aids is fronting the money. So cash flow will be extremely important here. When it comes to public excess cost aid, you'll notice, let's use the 25-26 year. Currently estimated at about $668,000. You're probably spending over $750,000 at least. I got to be maybe more than that, 800 maybe, to get that money. So what happens is that there's a threshold. You pay like the first, I don't know, 50, 60, 70,000 of the child's education, then you give you a percentage after that. When those numbers bob up and down, it's usually because of student populations increasing or decreasing during that period of time. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that the state laws just changed regulations by the commissioners to educate these children until age 22, but the aid only covers to age 21. Okay, so we've asked the legislature to update that to help you out. I'm not so sure that'll pass this year because it'll cost more money for the legislature. Private excess cost aid would be like schools for the blind, schools for the deaf, those types of things. Remember, it's by the luck of the draw who moves in, who lives in your district that would be in these programs. And federal law and state statute, commissioners' regulations are very restrict on providing these services. So these are constantly usually escalating costs. And they do take a toll on its budget, but these are the most needy kids probably in the entire school district, need and deserve probably all our help we can give them and their families. Software aid, library, textbook, and hardware, as you can see, goes up and down. I would probably guess those red numbers we're seeing right after 2024-25 will turn black by the end of the year. And that's because during the year, you submit records on how you have used those purchases to secure the aid. So it's a little too early to count those out. But I think it's going to keep moving along. Your district does make use of all those aids as much as possible. The universal pre-kindergarten aid. Now, universal pre-kindergarten aid, the number in orange is in orange for a couple reasons. One is that money does not go into your general fund. In other words, it doesn't go into your regular budget. It goes into what's called special aid fund. And it is special aid because it's for special purpose and can only be used for purposes like this that belong in that fund. But you'll notice that sometimes the difference between the two numbers is down, sometimes it's a zero, sometimes it's up, sometimes it's all over the place. There are a ton of rules for universal pre-kindergarten, how many slots you fill, there's different tiers of the money that can be used. You've got to keep in mind that if you take your own staff or you use an outside agency, it depends upon the cost of the program. In some cases, the aid is enough to cover the program. In other cases, it is not. So it's different in every single school district. But that revenue, that does not go into your general fund, it goes into the special aid fund. So what you'll see is down here at the bottom, I've actually subtracted it out because we're gonna focus tonight on your general fund. In other words, your budgeted fund. So actually, you've got a pretty good thing going on here. I think you've done really well. Now, a lot of this is determined by how good the reporting is by the school district. And as you can see, I think it's keeping up to snuff. So that's great. So now let's just take a look at a scenario. Now, what I'm going to do is, this is obviously a scenario. We don't know the exact number that your tax cap is going to move. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say to myself, okay, let's just say your tax cap is going to be 2%. Now, some of the things you have to consider here is where are the rest of your revenues going and where are they coming from? So I would think in your future, if all things being equal, 2% or about there looks like it would be okay. But we're only looking at the money coming in side of the equation. But you're going to have a pilot, and I think when a pilot comes in, it's going to wreak a little havoc on your tax cap. I know you've studied it, but it's going to be problematic. I mean, in a big way. So I'm just going to say, as a financial advisor, although you are the board and have to make the decision, my suggestion is you try and, whatever the cap is, go to it, because you're going to be returning money as a result of that pilot. Because you won't have two bites of this apple. But let's just pretend, for the sake of this experiment here, that what we do is we say we're going to go to 1.64 this year, and you can decide what you need to do, and then we'll say 2% for the rest of the year. I guess what I'm doing is giving you a research project to say, if we use those numbers in blue, how's the district going to fare, all things being equal? So if you can see, technically speaking, real property taxes, I'm going to go with the 25 year, would be 37.266 million. Everybody see where I'm at? And the 29-30 year would be about 41, so it would be increase about 3.7 million or 10%. But it's over a 5-year period, right? Then what we've got is pilots based on your current agreements before the new pilot takes effect. And if you'll see, it does move around a little bit. There's some of these have easy formulas and some of them not so hot, to be honest with you. I mean, they're all over the place. But that's the best estimate we've got so far. Your state aid that I'm using here is really from that previous page. There's your state aid. And you can see the building aid's going up because of building projects. You can see I've got that foundation aid in there, and the other aid's going up as well by 5.8 million. So the state aid picture looks pretty good. Medicaid reimbursement here, what we're trying to do is, it was $1 million this year, we're moving it to 975 to make it a little more realistic. Does that make sense to you? Because we don't want to overestimate it. And then we've got these interfund transfers, the Greenway funds from the V fund. We're going to be using those in here as a revenue source for 3 years only. So that looks like it kind of puts a crimp in your revenue, but you'll still get the money, but we're not going to count it as revenue against your budget. And we don't actually need to. So that'll be actually good. I think this might give you a little more rainy day funds. The next one is other revenue. Now the other revenues, you'll notice for the 25 year, 4.3 million. So what Allison's been able to do is take up just about every nickel that is nailed down in this school district and put it in a high interest bearing account. And she's used the competitive nature of doing it. So she's got one of the highest interest bearing accounts you've got. And so she's been able to make some interest on the money. So you got to make interest while the timing is good, right? Because you may not get another bite at the apple. Now, the only thing I would say is, if we look at that bottom line on the other revenues, you'll see it goes from 4.3 to 3.2. Well, don't forget, we're going to be buying things out of the reserves. She will have less cash than to invest, right? Now, we are taking a little gamble here in the sense that we don't know what the Federal Reserve is going to do or what the economy is going to do. I think the superintendent pointed out about the capital project and equipment coming in from outside the country, and the cost of escalations and things. We don't know, but let's just say if she can maintain a pretty adequate fund balance and she can keep a high interest rate, we're going to use, for this little example, maintaining this depressed amount of revenues. Right. So then what we've got down here is the total amount of revenues, and they would be going up about 11.3 million or 13.8%. Now, if you look at the orange number there, you'll see it vacillates from year to year based on, like, the year goes only to 291. That's the year you're losing some building aid, and the year prior is when you were gaining building aid, right? So they do tend to go up and down, as I showed you. Most of this is state aid that moves it around. You've got a little of the pilots moving it around too. If you look at the pilots between 26 and 27, you'll see about a $500,000 change. So these things do happen. So there's our revenue picture. Now let's take a look at our expenses. So to make it easy on you, so you don't have to memorize the revenues for the test at the end of my talk. What I've done is I put on the top here, the revenue total, so it'll make it easy on you, right? So here we go. Here's your expenses generally in a budget. We are not counting paper clips or how many pages you print or how many leases you have for copiers. We're looking at the big numbers, the things that affect the budget the most. So we start looking at the major categories, and the first is general support. So who's in the general support salary category? Well, that would be obviously superintendent's office, but it's also the business office, for example, but it's also maintenance, buildings and grounds, right? So it's all the cleaners, custodians, groundskeepers, whatever you've got, head custodian or whatever. So all those people are up there. So what we try to do is take a look at what we think is right now, we believe right now and know right now are your contractual obligations based on your collective bargaining agreements. And then in the out years where we see this trajectory going. Now, here's something that's worth noting to you. A lot of times boards will say, well, we've got to really, we don't want to pay these people this much so we could slow that line down. I understand the logic of that because it's going from about 3.8 million in 25 to about 4.5 in 29-30, about 690,000 up. But the thing is, you've got to find a cleaner, custodian, and maintenance mechanic. What happens sometimes is districts do a self-inflicted injury whereby they lower the wrong thing. Okay, so it's kind of like, well, we don't want to give our teachers that much of a raise. Well, what if we can't hire anybody anymore? We need these people. So you got to be careful. You don't want a self-inflicted injury. The district has not done that, but I always caution districts to be careful. But that is actually a pretty gentle slope considering what's going on in the salary area. People are having a hard time finding good custodians, good cleaners, and maintenance mechanics to work on your buildings. Other in general support would be your heat, light, electricity, utilities. It could be BOCES cost, for instance, for technology, but it's also the wax in the floor, the toilet paper, the plastic bags for the waste baskets, right? I mean, it's a whole pile of things. It could also be equipment you're buying, could be a lawnmower in there. So the idea is this is a pretty good ticket item as well. And you'll notice that that's going from about 5.3 million in 25 to about 6,757,000. Okay, now I put percentages on the right-hand side, if you notice, and I really am always reluctant to put percentages because board members look at percentages, but real finance people, they ignore the percentages and they look at the dollar amounts in the column next to it where it says difference, because you can't spend a percent. Let me give an example. The other category went up 757,000, 14%, but your revenue is going up 13%. 1% less, but it's $10.9 million. You see how the percentages don't work that well? But I put them in there because people like to look at it, but here we go. How about instruction? This is the mission of the school district. Starts off, we'll say with principals, for instance. It's got teachers, guidance counselors, the school nurses in there, your coaches right here, your best advisors, elementary teachers, your high school teachers, your middle school teachers, special ed teachers, behavioral specialists, your reading teachers, your coaches are in there, your PE teachers. Everybody that works for the kid anytime during the day, day in, day out, is in salaries. Please note it's the biggest number on the page, and it's supposed to be because that's the purpose of the school district. The top general support is for infrastructure to make sure it runs, but the instruction part is the delivery system. So delivery system is going from about 31 million in 25 to about 35.8 based on what we see for your contractual obligations. And this is maintaining current staff levels. So you can decide what you want to do there, but that's what it's moving. So it's 14.3 over 5 years, 4.4% for 4.4 million up. Other, what is other? A huge part of other would be all the kids you send to BOCES, special ed or not, or general ed, CTE. It could be a whole bunch of things that you buy for BOCES and services that you do. There's a bunch of things, but it's also the books. It's also the textbooks, the library books. It's also the chemicals for the chemistry lab, the balances for the physics lab, right? It's the basketballs for PE, if you get my drift. It's everything that runs the district for the educational program. And of course, it's a big number because you've got a nice, good school district and you're adequately supplied. Going from about 15.9 million, 18.8, about 2.8 up. Okay, transportation salaries. Transportation salaries here about 2.2 million going to about 2.4. Not much of a movement there. You seem to be doing real well in the transportation area. But I must tell you, I'm working with a ton of school districts that can't find drivers, and they just simply steal from each other in the surrounding districts. So it's actually starting to become like a wage war. in certain parts of the state. It is simply amazing. Your other, also in transportation, not just drivers, it could be your head mechanic, it could be other mechanics, it could be your bus monitors, it could be all those types of people that work in the transportation system. Other, of course, is what? Could be your fuel, could be the oil, could be the grease, it could be the mufflers, right? It could be the brakes and all the rest of it. Everything that's in a bus garage that you need for inventory, to fix the buses, work on the buses, and everything related to that bus garage is in the other category. Then we look at employee benefits. We got retirement, social security, workers' comp, health, and then other, which is kind of a miscellaneous category for things that may come up from time to time. Retirement is obviously a function of salaries. Like I said, it's moving around a little bit right now. Keep in mind though, even though the ERS rate is going up higher than the TRS rate, people in the ERS system make a lot less money than the people in the TRS. So there seems to be a balancing effect here. Health is the one we all worry about across the entire state of New York. Yours is actually doing pretty good, I must say. Matter of fact, I was pleasantly surprised to see these numbers. We moved about 11 million to about 14, about 2.8 up. I've got districts right now, I'm doing their long range plans, and they told me next year their health insurance is going up 12.9%, year after that 15%, year after that 15%, year after that 10%, and year after that 10%. In other words, the consortia that they belong to is hitting the skids terribly. And sometimes it's a self-inflicted injury, but it doesn't seem to be your case. What they do is they don't keep up with the rates, they burn off their own reserves, and then they have to have these big increases. This by comparison to other districts, this looks really good. You've got your debt service in there for your capital projects and things like this, and that's all in there, and you see that moves around. It's actually going up as you come into this new piece of this capital project into 27 and 28. But don't forget, so remember I showed you the bump in your building aid? So what's happening there is it's not exactly equal, and that's because no building project, no purchase of a bus, no purchase of postal services is 100% payable. So there's a little minor difference. And then what I like about this is I always show the RAND-TAN number, and it's all zeros, and that's exactly what it's supposed to be. In other words, the board ought to know that your district is so well run in terms of cash flow and finances. You do not need to borrow money for cash flow to make payroll and things like this. You're doing just great. I've got a bunch of new clients where there's numbers in there, and I'm really worried about them. When I came here, there were numbers in there, right? We got rid of those numbers fast, if you remember right, for those of you who are around. And then we had to make some big choices, but we got rid of them. But the truth of it is, well-run districts all have zeros in there, and you should be proud. Interfund transfers, of course, are like for summer school special ed, transfers to school lunch and things like this. Now, here's what we see here, though. If you add up the numbers here, we see that your expenses are going to exceed over time your revenues. Everybody see what's going on here? So what has to happen here is like all school districts, we've got to strive, and I say this every year I meet with you, we got to strive for greater efficiency, effectiveness, cost effectiveness. We got to find out our needs from our wants. When you start not having as much money as you thought you were going to have, certain things that you like to always do become luxuries and you necessarily can't do them. So I think what's going to happen is over the years, including this year, you notice we did right size some of the numbers in this year's budget. We've got to continue to do that in future years. So again, to make it easier on the open book test you'll get at the end, what I've done is I've actually put the revenues and expenditures over top of each other. So let's just kind of do a little quick exercise. Let's go to 25 here and let's look at the orange numbers. Money in 4.7 million, money out 2.6. See how good that is? 26, money in 3, money out 4. You see how it starts to turn? Because what we're saying is, and superintendent's mentioned a number of times, we're starting to see this compounding escalation of costs. Right? And you can't compound your revenues. Does that make sense to you? You just can't say, okay, we need more pilot, we need more state aid, you just got to give us more. So this is where we're starting to see imbalance. Now, in 27, it looks not so bad, but in 28, you can see there, we got the 27 building aid coming in, and we got some building aid kind of going out in 28, but we still have expenses. Notice how the revenues start falling away because, you know, we don't know what kind of bus you're going to buy. We don't know what kind of aid you're going to get. So we got to keep that factored in here. So it's not a disaster. The revenue could be higher, but we do know where the expenses are going. Make sense? Now, also keep in mind, we have adjustments here. So in other words, a budget is, people always say to me, Rick, I thought we had a $10 million budget. How come we didn't spend 10 million? Well, if you have a $10 million budget, you're not supposed to spend 10 million. And the reason is because you have to have a budget big enough so that no matter what happens, you can pay for it. So I was an assistant superintendent in the school district, and I had a family of 4 move in that had 4 kids who were unbelievably multiply and severely disabled, and each kid's program cost me $200,000. So one day I was going, wow, we're in great shape. The next day, you know, I was like wondering what my career would be looking like in the future. So the thing is, these things do happen. So you have to have this carryover money. The other thing is that you are heavily dependent on Native American aid. The last couple of years has come in pretty good. But if you remember a couple of years ago, we were millions and millions behind in payments from the state. So if that happens, we can't afford to have that happen again. So we've got to be prepared. But if you'll notice, between the 24 and 25 year, the numbers decreased rapidly. And this is because what Allison is trying to do is trying to right size the budget. And if you see it, then we flattened that out at 7 million because we need cash flow. So remember how a school district works financially here. July 1, who's here? Central office, buildings and grounds, right? You know, those people are working, okay? And maybe you have a little staff development here. You got some couple of administrators working, but that's it. But you're also paying everybody's pension then. Matter of fact, you have to pay in a lump sum early. It's actually intercepted from your state aid. So this big payment you have to make, you don't even make it. They take it out of your check. Then what happens is you have to keep paying everybody's health insurance. They're not even here, right? You got to keep all this stuff going. Then July, that's July 1. Then all of a sudden, first week in September, maybe the last week in August, everybody shows up. The full transportation system is working, right? Everything's going. You have to pay everybody. All the payrolls, all the benefits, Social Security, you got to pay for everything now. And over the summer, you got to order everything you needed for the school year. So you need cash to operate the district. You don't even get tax money until November. And guess when your biggest state aid check is? The month of March. So you have to front the whole district, right? So think of it. You got an $87 million budget, $90 million budget. You're trying to front the whole district with your cash flow. Now that a carryover adjustment certainly helps you. And of course, at the same time, in some of these years, we're going to be burning off some reserves for the purpose of actually saving some money, because we can buy, we'll say, buses, vehicles, and things like technology cash. We don't have to borrow for the money and pay interest. So it's a great plan. But you also have what's called the 4% limit. In other words, what you've tried to do is stay close to this limit. It's Real Property Tax Law 1318. You're allowed to hold in cash to help you with your cash flow 4% of the next year's budget. And that's what those numbers represent. As the next year's budget gets bigger, the amount you need for cash flow to operate that budget gets bigger. So you add the adjustment money to the 4% money and you've got cash flow. Now you can float the district till the tax money comes in, and you can float the district until the state aid comes in. So that's important. So all those are real. So where's the rest of the money? Well, what happens here is we basically have a little phenomenon going on here. We're trying to find the revenue to expenditure difference. Remember, there's always a difference between your planned revenues and your planned expenditures. Your revenues are pretty much set in stone. Remember, you got taxes, you got state aid, right? You can't move around those much. But your budget has to be big enough so that anything happens, you can pay for it. So the distance between, we'll say, the 25 yellow number on the top, the revenues is 82 million. And the next yellow line down in expenses is 87. The gap is about 4.9 million. That's called, the fancy name is appropriated fund balance. What that means is that if the revenues come in as anticipated and that budget gets spent out because all of a sudden you have unexpected expenses you have no control over, you will run to your reserves and take out $4.9 million. So everybody see what happens? That's why it's important to have carryover money left so you don't use it. Now, if you really notice what's going on here, I've also tapped your reserves. I've got your reserve amounts in here. Remember, I've got that little line up there where the minus numbers are, where I have adjustments for reserves. You're going to be taking money out of the reserves. But at the same time, if you'll notice, we've got a little more money in the appropriate fund balance or the unappropriated fund balance. So I'm going to move that over into reserves. If you get my drift, so you can build your reserves more for the next 2 years. That's great. You're in great shape. The problem starts to become is all of a sudden, when we start looking at the fund balance going up, it looks great. Then all of a sudden, we see this $7.4 million come up. The $7.4 million is the difference between the revenues and expenditures in the 28 year. Instead of being short 5 million, if everything goes off the rails, you'd be short 7.4. So in other words, you're short 400,000. And at the same time, we've just taken out $2.26 million of reserves. You see the reserve negatives up there? So what's going to happen is it's going to have an effect on changing your revenue, your reserves down, which is naturally what would happen. But as we keep moving around, we've got to keep that 7 million sacrosanct. Every year, the budget gets more out of balance because you don't have a lot of control over revenue. That's why I'm mentioning to you, in from Rick, the tax cap is going to be important. Okay? So the thing is, you want to stay afloat. But if you need 9 million to balance your budget and you're only carrying over 7 million and you're taking another 1.2 out of the reserves, you could hypothetically be more short. Now, keep in mind here that that number that's in the assigned appropriate fund balance, let's go to the last column over, 10.5 million. That may be sitting in your reserves with the $1 million. But the thing is, you're not allowed to spend it in case you spend out your budget. So it kind of hamstrings you. Now, you'll still have, if you look across here, you still have $15.8 million right next to my RGT there, 15.795 million in cash, right, to run the district. So you're still healthy, but you can see what happens when costs start escalating extremely rapidly. So what happens here is, in some cases, you may have to start looking at some ways to trim the escalation of your expenses. Okay, and there you go. So keep in mind, I did not put anything in this budget to buy those zero emission buses or for your bus garage renovations for them. Okay, so what happens here is that's still not to be done. I would implore every single board member tomorrow morning to call their legislator and senator and tell them to push this thing back 5 to 7 years because nobody can afford it. It might be a great thing to have and do, but we don't have any money to do it. Matter of fact, I don't even think they have enough buses to give us. So what are my recommendations? First of all, this year's budget is not over. So in other words, we could end up with 2 high needs kids moving in the district tomorrow. Or what could happen is 2 could move out, right? So the thing is, we just got to keep an eye on that and make sure we can carry over as much as possible. The budget process is always difficult because we're making assumptions. Do I really know? Absolutely. You said, Rick, do you really know how much health insurance is going to be in 29-30 school year? I'd say no, but I know how much it costs now. And if you keep everybody you got or commensurate to it, and it's going at the rate of escalation your consortium is telling me, that's where it's going to end up or close to it. So we're trying to extrapolate here as best we can, as reliable as we can. You always, every school district should have a mission internally to become more efficient, more effective, and it gives much economy of scale as you can. But keep in mind, I got school in quotes, school inflation costs, escalations of supplies, materials, and equipment is a concern because it doesn't follow the CPI. The consumer price index is about, it's probably going to go off the rails soon because it's also about cars and washers and dryers. And so what happens is it doesn't have anything to do with what you do, but it's in all the formulas, unfortunately. So your cost for textbooks and equipment, supplies, materials, chemicals for the chem lab, it may go up higher than inflation. So you got to keep that in mind. Really reevaluate purchases and staff need. So to me, if you ever notice, we're always adding things to school districts, add. We never take anything away. So sometimes we have to do is take a deep breath and find out what programs are working better than others, ones aren't working, and make some changes to make it a little more efficient. But also you have to think of attrition and breakage, and they're 2 different things. So if Rick's working for you and then Rick leaves, every district would normally say, who are we going to get to replace Rick? What you got to start thinking now is, do we need to replace Rick? If we don't. Because what happens is then you can save that money. That cost does not go out the door. Does that make sense? All right, same thing. Now, also could be that Rick's working for you, but you just discovered we really don't need Rick. That's like pushing attrition, shall we say. Now, the other way is breakage. Rick leaves and we do need a Rick, but we got to hire a Rick for less than we paid the old Rick. You can save more money through attrition than you ever can through breakage. Just keep that in mind, okay? But so you have to look it over, but you've got to be aware of the labor scarcity issues. In some parts of the state, it's hard to find bus drivers. In other parts, you can't find a physics teacher. You can't find a good building administrator. You can't find a good this or a good that. So what you don't want to do is shoot yourself in the foot. Monitor your long-term expenditures to the financial plan and limitations on revenues. If there's anything you learn from here is that your revenues, you have little or no control over. Some of them you have control over, but you can ask for taxes. If you get my drift, you can ask, the voters have to approve it. But the thing is, I wouldn't be shy there because that's the only thing you can move. But your expenditures are moving much more rapidly. And I think salaries and benefits can easily, if we're not careful, overwhelm a district's residents against any potential revenue claims. So it could be a real problem. Also, the controller has announced in the last couple of months that he's worried about the state budget, not only right now, but in the next couple of years, where it's getting increasingly out of balance. So that's why I put down that 2.5 instead of keeping that foundation aid going, because I'm not so sure the cavalry is going to arrive to help. Make sense? And of course, we've got the national problems with, as you pointed out, the superintendent pointed out, it could be tariffs, could be God only knows what. So who knows? So I think we just got to be careful. Use of the capital reserve, the creation of successor capital reserves must be continued as a successful strategy to ensure the fiscal health of the district, and it stabilizes the district's tax levy plan. You have done an excellent job at that. Although the district has received Native American tuition aid on a timely basis for the last couple of years, prior to that, the receipt of that aid has been less than timely and has had substantial impact on your cash flow. So that's why I'm saying the more you can get for carryover, the better off you will be. The erratic nature and uncertainty of the arrival of that aid to the district requires the district to enhance cash balances for cash flow. The long-range financial and capital plans to help stabilize the district are a useful strategy. You've been using them. You're doing great. Recent capital projects have helped with some infrastructure, obviously. And of course, I see the new auditorium piece going up, but more will always need to be done. There's always something that needs to be fixed, right? It's a lot of square footage. Recent right sizing has successfully assisted the district financially. Allison has tightened things up where she can, but the key thing is we're going to have to really start looking things over, we'll say, over the next couple of years. The district must continue to right size based on diminished enrollments or trend data. So it might be you have less general ed kids, more special ed kids, you have more kids in poverty, you have more kids that have this learning problem or that learning problem. You've got to adjust the system accordingly. It's critical, this is critical to the district's continued fiscal success. State aid, foundation aid is currently slated for 9% increase. It looks like a lot, but against the $90 million budget, it's not a lot. Think about it for a second. So that's for 25-26. Subsequently, status increases are unknown. We don't know. Expense-driven aid continues under current law. It's hoped that maybe foundation aid, something will be coming as they pick up some more things that I've suggested and others to help your district out. 7, the costs associated with zero emission bus mandate. They are expensive. Develop a plan not to do it, but to lobby. To be absolutely honest with you, you got to push back. Monitor the tax cap. Note the growing use of your appropriated fund balance. The only way to offset that is 2 ways. You got to decrease your rate of expenses, or you have to find a way to increase your revenues, and simultaneously, probably. You don't want to get into a super majority situation. You want to avoid that, okay? Because it kind of ruins things politically. And that's what I would say. A well-run school district, proud to be here, just excellent. So thank you. Any questions? You got the test, Austin, right?
Do you take the test, Rick?
I mean, you've talked about it a lot, and Dan has. The biggest thing that worries us is the buses, 2027. Are you hearing anything out east Albany that
Yes.
they may back off a little?
Well,
Or
here's the thing. It's funny because I meet with legislators all the time about this. And they're like sick of hearing me talk about it. But here's the thing. What they say privately to me is this, it sounded like a good idea at the time. I mean, who didn't want clean energy? Who didn't want the kids not breathing in the diesel fumes and the drivers getting sick? Who didn't want any of this? I mean, we got to get to the 21st century, for heaven's sake. He says, now that we really figure out how this is going to work, we're trying to figure out how to gracefully back up, politically back up without abandoning it. So the governor came out with a comment about a month ago. She said, she's taking a lot of heat on this too. And she said this, well, you got to keep in mind, this was aspirational. In other words, this was like a goal in mind. But to me, then after that came out, I met with more legislators that, yeah, maybe aspirational is her heads, but it's a law. It's required now. So they said, okay, maybe what we could do, so what's happening, some of the state groups are saying, maybe we can get more waivers or, you know, exemptions or something over a period of time. Well, to me, those do not work at all. For instance, so let's just say Niagara Wheatfield calls up the state and says, hey, look, we don't want to have to buy these the first couple of years because we don't have enough money. And then they said, okay, we'll let you off for the first 2 years. That means you have less time now to turn over your whole fleet. So it's actually going to cost you more. Then I got other districts who call me up and say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to buy an extra 5 or 6 diesel buses. Therefore, we won't have to buy one of those electric buses until like 2032 or something. I go, don't do that. I go, why not? We'll get ahead of the game. I said, you'll be behind the game because in 2032, you'll have to replace those 5 or 6 buses with buses 3 times the cost. You'll be behind the game. Of course, they go, well, I never thought about it that way. It was a good idea or something. But all right, so I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm glad they called me. But the thing is that some of them are saying, well, maybe what we'll do is one legislator said to me, I think we should go to hydrogen fuel cell buses instead of the diesel or instead of the electric. So I said, this is a big meeting and I hated to do this, but I couldn't take it. I don't suffer fools well. It's been a problem my whole life. So what happens is I said, you're saying you want hydrogen fuel buses? Yeah, he said, I think it's a good way to go. I said, well, where's the closest hydrogen fuel factory from here? We were in Syracuse. He says, well, it's in Buffalo. I said, okay, so all they'd have to do is like bring them over and put them in the buses. He goes, yeah. So they have to ship about, say 20,000 buses worth of hydrogen fuel cells in a whole long 5-mile line in 18-wheel diesel tractor trailer trucks. Because I never thought of that. So, well, they're not going to fly over by themselves. I don't know if you know this, but it's also required the trucking companies start selling. They have to sell 1 electric bus for every 10 diesel buses this year. So now, like a lot of these big trucking companies are rebelling. And then some of the municipalities, they got a waiver, but in the law, it says if you have a garbage truck, a trash truck, you have to buy, the next one has to be a zero emission. And it's just like totally crazy. So I think the legislators, as far as I know them talking to me, they all know it's nuts, but they don't know how to solve it. And they want to kick it down the road for another year. My answer to that was, you've got to solve it this year or we're all in trouble. Here's why. Because if you don't vote, we'll say this December, to retrofit your bus garage, you will not have the chargers installed in time to accept an electric bus.
The whole infrastructure has to change.
The whole thing. So meanwhile, I've got districts calling me up saying, well, I talked to National Grid and they can get us the juice to our barn. So then I called the district next door and I said, did you call National Grid, see if you get the juice to your barn? And they said, no. So then they called and said, no, they can't because they're getting it to the other guy's barn. So the problem is even the infrastructure is not there. So I actually wrote an article and sent it to my legislators and I called it The Emperor Has No Clothes. Because what actually happens is we can't get the buses, we can't get the infrastructure, there's no juice, nobody has any money, right? And the only school districts that actually are using these are a couple. There's only 100 of them on the road. For the last 3 years we could buy them. There's only 100 of them on the road. We only now have to replace them 49,900 more. So we're close, right? So I'm saying to myself, really, guys, please, you're embarrassing yourselves, right? So I just hope they move on it. Something tells me though, politics is like, it moves at glacial speed. And it takes a lot. In other words, unless it's right in their face, they don't seem to get it. But there's a lot going on in all of these. So I don't know where this is going. I mean, it bothers me a lot because we're not ready and we can't have it. We just can't have it. So if it's a great thing to do, then move it back so we have a chance to get the bus, so we have a chance to build the infrastructure. But I mean, if the grid can't even get it to you, I could go to Verizon, buy a new iPhone and they give it to me and I go home to my log cabin. I got no place to plug it in. That's what we're doing. We just can't do it. It's ridiculous. I got to point it out. So I really pounded them, but that's what, what they responded to is people calling them. Sending them emails, sending them letters, that's what they respond to. Because they look at me as if, I'm a hired gun to go tell them what to do. But I mean, really, the people talk, they listen. You understand what I mean? And I think the thing is when you're at public meetings like this, bringing this up is a great idea. So that people who are listening to us or watching this say, yeah, I am gonna call. Cause I don't want my taxes going for that, or I don't think we can afford that, or I don't wanna demolish programs for kids to do this thing. We're not ready. So I think really, if you could all call tomorrow, not that I know what your calendars are like, but seriously, think about it. You've gotta put pressure on these folks. That's how things get done. Right, you gotta get right in front of them. Does that answer your question as best I could?
Yes, Mr. Timms, thank you, and
Good.
I thank you for the presentation.
Oh, you're very welcome, as always.
Thanks, Rick.
All right, you're
Appreciate it.
welcome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Safe journey home.
Take care.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, items for board discussion. Do you have any items for board discussion? Any old business? New business, we do have one, appeal of the superintendent's decision. Resolved that the Board of Education had considered the appeal date March 24th and received on March 28th, 2025 of the March 2025 written decision of the superintendent of schools hereby sustains that the decision and denies the appeal. Okay. Comments, do we have any other comments? Public comments? Okay, board member comments. I would just like to say, Allison, congratulations, if you've done this district well, and that was well-earned, award that you have received. I mean, just what he's explained to here on the board tonight shows what the work that you've done has really helped us immensely. Anybody else?
Thank you, Allison. Well, you'll be here for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, but the. Yeah. Board member comments, any? Adjournment, okay, call for a motion to adjourn meeting,
So move.
second,